Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Aragonese. The Aragonese people once dominated northeastern Spain. The Kingdom of Aragon had its own language, and they were a force to be reckoned with in the Middle Ages. The Aragonese built some pretty incredible monuments in the region around Congos de Montrepey. This part of Spain is beautiful and largely uninhabited today, with only a few of this ancient culture's fortifications still dotting the landscape. There is a medieval stronghold here that dates back to 1070. It once guarded the gorge moving through the land. There are also hermitages, with one of them having a rather unique story. The story says that in the small town of Chiriveta, the statue of the Virgin was found every morning outside of the temple as if moving on its own. It was happening every single day, and the locals realized that the Virgin was asking for a new hermitage. So, a second one was built in the exact location that the Virgin kept appearing each morning. But years later, it turned out that there was no miracle at all. Instead, it was the priest of the hermitage, who was tired of having to go all the way to work on bad roads. He invented the story so that a new hermitage would be built closer to his house, so he wouldn't need to walk as far. In any case, the Aragonese are still around today. The Kingdom of Aragon was actually the foundation for what eventually became the country of Spain, though their culture as a whole is no longer a dominating force. Number 9. The Austronesians of Madagascar. The Austronesian people are extremely interesting because they don't live in just one part of the world. They are also still around today, though not in the same way they were thousands of years ago. Austronesian people include populations in Madagascar, Micronesia, New Guinea, Polynesia, and even Taiwan. Austronesian people are descendants of a single people who migrated out across the sea in little boats, spreading themselves as far as possible. They actually started in Taiwan before the Chinese Han ever made it to the island. This was sometime around 3000 BC, or roughly 5,000 years ago. It's hard to say anything about their history before that, but we know they started in Taiwan. From there, they took boats and made it all the way to the Philippines in 2200 BC. The Austronesians were the first people to invent sailing technologies that allowed them to traverse the ocean. They used catamarans, outrigger boats, and even invented the crab claw sail. By the year 2000 BC, they had either assimilated themselves or had been assimilated by people in Indonesia, Easter Island, Madagascar, and New Zealand. They were basically in a position much like England during the golden age of exploration, when they were creating colonies all over the world. The Austronesians did it before them, landing in places like Tonga, Hawaii, Singapore, and spreading into Southeast Asia. It's not so much that this ancient culture vanished, but that they were absorbed by dozens of different cultures. Today, there is not really much direct trace of the 5,000-year-old explorers left, as they've blended so seamlessly with so many other peoples and cultures. Number 8. The Grand Canyon Civilization. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, meaning there is plenty of room in this natural wonder for mysteries. And one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Grand Canyon is that there very well could have been an underground civilization living here hundreds, even thousands of years ago that we barely know anything about. The thing about the lost civilization of the Grand Canyon is that it's currently just a myth. The story began in 1909, when an explorer, allegedly with the Smithsonian Institution, found caverns in the Grand Canyon filled with artifacts. The explorer was G.E. Kincaid, working with anthropologist S.A. Jordan. Inside the caverns, they discovered granaries full of seeds, ancient copper weapons, and curious statues unlike anything ever found in the Americas. Plus, the size of the cavern suggested that people could have lived inside, up to 50,000 people comfortably. But what kinds of artifacts did they actually find? The experts thought they looked Egyptian. It made them believe that there had once been an ancient civilization of Egyptians, or at least Egyptian-like people, thriving in the Grand Canyon. But that doesn't make sense because the Egyptians had no way to reach the Grand Canyon. They had no way to reach America, never mind Arizona. We still don't know the truth about what actually happened here. All of the artifacts have vanished. The Smithsonian denies that there ever were artifacts to begin with. And plus, there are some awfully suspicious places in the Grand Canyon that are completely off limits to civilians. So, what's going on here? Number 7. The death of ancient Egypt. Speaking about ancient Egypt, not many people understand that ancient Egypt crumbled and died just like every other major culture in history. Like the Romans, the Babylonians, Egypt declined both as an economic and political force and was wiped out. But with ancient Egypt, the decline was slow and painful. Between the years 1069 and 653 BC, Egypt was having a hard time. They had a bit of a renaissance in which religion, art, and architecture were all restored, but they were having difficulties with the Assyrians. By 671, Assyria had successfully conquered Egypt. They installed native Egyptian rulers to keep the population peaceful. There were a few rebellions from pharaohs trying to retake parts of Egypt, but none of them succeeded. What's really interesting about what the Assyrians did is that they almost brainwashed Egypt and turned the country into their pet. By 609 BC, when the Assyrians were being beaten on all sides by the Babylonians, the Medians, and the Scythians, the Egyptians actually stepped up to try and save them, though they were unsuccessful. Once the Assyrians were gone, the Persians captured Egypt. This went on until 332 BC, when Alexander the Great took over. There was a very nice period of peace between Alexander the Great and when Egypt became a Roman province. The Romans were extremely vicious, spreading Christianity, closing down Egyptian temples, and essentially attempting to erase all aspects of the rich history and culture of the native Egyptians. And this would be the final straw for ancient Egypt. They continued to speak Egyptian, though all of their heritage was gradually forgotten. Number 6. The Clovis Culture. The North American Clovis culture migrated into South America about 11,000 years ago, and then later vanished without a trace. In a new study, researchers have taken a look at DNA from 49 people living over the past 10,000 years. They took this DNA from skeletons found in Belize, Brazil, and the Central Andes, and what they found was that many people were genetically linked to the Clovis people, and yet they haven't found a single artifact of the Clovis in South America. According to Nathan Nakatsuka at Harvard Medical School, he wasn't really expecting to find a relationship between the Clovis and the ancient people of South America. And yet it seems that the Clovis moved into Central and South America and continued to spread, having children and perhaps intermingling with those around them, even as they left their culture behind. But who were the Clovis to begin with? They were the first migrants who crossed the Bering Strait from Asia into North America 15,000 years ago. They traveled in at least 3 major migration groups, then slowly began to spread across North America. But what's strange is that about 9,000 years ago, the Clovis mostly vanished and were replaced by unknown people with unknown genetic ancestry. Scientists are still trying to figure out what happened to the original migrants, why and how they made it all the way into South America, and who took their place in the north. Number 5. The Silurian Hypothesis. The Silurian Hypothesis suggests there may have been a complex culture living on the planet before humans ever existed. Forget about the ancient Egyptians, forget about Mesopotamia, because we're going back millions and millions of years. You might think that if there had been advanced civilizations before humanity, they would have left some trace of themselves behind. But that's not necessarily true. It really depends on just how advanced this mysterious civilization was and what kind of things they built. For example, in 100 million years, scientists will still be able to see that humans manipulated the soil to feed billions of people. They will also find plastic all around the world for millions of years to come. There is a very little chance that a civilization as destructive as our own ever existed. If anyone else had polluted the world like this, we would already know about it because that kind of evidence doesn't go away. But it is possible that there had been a primitive society that didn't advance beyond, let's say, the medieval period. It's also possible that they could have been a race of strange creatures, more like lizards than humans. Even if they had been around for 100,000 years, that would still be 500 times longer than our own industrial civilization. And if they had built palaces of stone and brick 2 million years ago, there would be absolutely no trace of these structures left today. In any case, scientists say it is possible there was an advanced civilization of creatures living on Earth, but that all evidence has been wiped away. What do you think about this theory? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 4. The Toalians. The Toalians are an absolute mystery to scientists. So far, we've only actually discovered one skeleton that belonged to these curious people. It happened back in 2015, when archaeologists from the University of Hasanuddin, located on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, found the skeleton of a woman buried deep in a limestone cave. The woman was only about 17 years old when she died 7,200 years ago. She's the only physical example of a Toalean person ever found. You're probably wondering how scientists could possibly know by a single skeleton that there was a whole culture of mysterious people. The thing is that the Austronesians, the people I told you about earlier, spread into Indonesia 3,500 years ago. This means that whoever this girl was lived around 4,000 years before that happened. It means that there was a culture of Neolithic people living on Sulawesi before anybody else showed up. It's just that scientists have never been able to find more of their bones or other remains. So far, they've only found artifacts as evidence of this ancient culture, mostly things like arrowheads and stone tools in caves. Number 3. The Giraffe Culture. The settlement of Shar-i Sokta appeared in the Bronze Age 3,200 years ago. The entire city covers an area of 151 hectares, making it one of the largest on the planet at the beginning of the urban era. It also has one of the biggest graveyards ever found, with 40,000 ancient graves still hiding beneath the sand. But what's interesting about this city is that it belonged to an independent Bronze Age civilization called the Giraffe Culture. These people were located between the Elam people to the west and the Indus Valley civilization to the east, and yet they had nothing to do with the other, arguably much greater and more influential powers. They governed themselves, had their own architecture, unique language, and their own specific beliefs. We just don't know what a lot of their beliefs were because the Giraffe culture disappeared in 2100 BC. Their sudden vanishing came after the great city of Shar-i Sokta burned down 3 times. Their city burned to the ground and then was rebuilt 3 different times before they finally gave up and abandoned the place. It's for this reason that archaeologists call it the Burnt City. When the Giraffe culture left, nobody really knows where they went or what happened to them. They may have integrated into some other nearby culture or simply faded away into history. Number 2. The civilization at Cacao. There was once a civilization in Mexico even more mysterious than the Maya. To understand these people, we need to look at the archaeological site of Cacao. It's not a very popular place when compared to spots like Chichen Itza, but it's almost more interesting because it was once the home of a civilization called the Olmeca Xicalanga. Archaeologists and historians have been puzzling over these people for decades. They were probably related to the Maya, but they had their own uniqueness about them. They dominated small parts of central Mexico around the 5th century and then disappeared for a few hundred years before popping back up in the late 8th century during the fall of Teotihuacan. Nobody knows exactly where they came from, though there is one theory that says they came from the Gulf of Mexico. British archaeologist John Eric Thompson believes they may have started as Mayan merchants, but gradually became their own self-governing civilization who built their own city. Then, when Teotihuacan fell, they rose up to take advantage of the power vacuum. They settled in Cacao and survived all the way until the 12th century, when they were conquered by the Chichimecas. The few survivors went to live in Tabasco, where some bloodlines may even survive today. Number 1. The Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire lasted for roughly 300 years. It was established around 312 BC by Seleucus I Nicator, one of the last generals of Alexander the Great. When Alexander died in 323 BC, he didn't leave anyone to take care of his kingdom. Instead, he said that all of his empire should go to the strongest man among them. This resulted in serious conflict between all of Alexander's top generals, including Seleucus and Ptolemy I Soter. And while some went on to rule parts of Egypt and other pieces of Alexander's quickly fracturing empire, Seleucus went on to do his own thing, merging east and west more successfully than Alexander ever did. In the first days, the Seleucid Empire was tolerant of all cultures and religions. There was efficient bureaucracy, trade was flowing, and so was the money, and they continued to expand using military campaigns. They at one point stretched all the way from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus Valley, but the decline came soon enough for these people. After about 150 years, the original vision of Seleucus I became lost. There were 3 kings ruling the empire between 163 and 145 BC, each more concerned with their own position in government than actually governing. As you can tell, not much has changed in the past 2,000 years. The last king of the Seleucids died in 63 BC after a reign of just 2 years. His name was Philip II Philoramus, and he desperately tried to maintain his position while the empire fell apart all around him. Though by now, the empire wasn't much more than a small colony in Syria, holding on to a name that used to mean a lot more. Thanks for watching! Which of these vanished people do you think is the most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and browse our massive selection of other great videos. See you soon! Bye!